Thank you very much, Ms. Garvey and Mr. Mead, and thank you for your service to our country in so many ways. I just was sitting here trying to connect some dots in my own mind, and Ms. Garvey, when you said the most powerful thing that the hijackers had going for them, I thought you were going to say their willingness to die, because in many ways I think that's the essence of what we now know since September the 11th, the essence of catastrophic terrorism. The fascinating thing, too, is that if the FBI, as a law enforcement agency, which is used to gathering evidence for prosecution of offenders, if those offenders are willing to die, there's very little evidence, nobody to prosecute. There may be a trail leading up to that, but what do you do after that? So I think that brings us to the discussion we were at this morning of how do we get a hold of matching foreign intelligence and domestic intelligence. How do we hold someone accountable in the government with these 15 agencies and half a dozen different cabinet departments that are somehow responsible for just foreign intelligence? And how do we bridge that gap between foreign intelligence and domestic intelligence? That is a big challenge, because I do believe that part of this is, as I think it was Jane Harman said, or someone else said, that we do have to go forward in a strategic offensive, and part of that offensive is intelligence to pick up before they get here people who are willing to die. So I think this has changed the dynamic here. May I just ask kind of a timeline question here, because I said that on the outset because I do not want to miss the strategic importance of what has changed here. September the 11th wasn't a hijacking. It was a hijacking, but with a political purpose. But the means of executing that were so much different than anything we had experienced. The willingness to die, the willingness to plan for a long time, financed out of a cultural sense of mission against the West. This is powerful stuff. And your point about what we're up against is a special operations against a public transportation system. And the 700 million passengers a year or so. There are a lot of people who travel on subways, a lot of people who travel in cars, through tunnels and so forth. So there are other parts of the people's transportation system. We have to think about cargo coming into our country and so forth. So we have a massive challenge if we are indeed up against a special operations thing here, and we are, with the willingness to die. Tom Friedman calls these people non-deterrables. It's one thing, as Senator Graham was talking about, to deal with in the Cold War, to deter the Soviet Union through better intelligence and mutual assured destruction. But for people who are willing to die, how do you deter that? I think you deter it with better intelligence, for one thing, coordinated intelligence, and do everything you can, as you pointed out, to change the system from time to time, and to have deterrence built in that nobody knows about. So I think you're onto something here, because this is a new era here in terms of defense. May I just ask a little timeline question here? You may or may not know some detailed answers, but I'll try to run through it. Published accounts indicate that Boston flight controllers determined that American Airlines Flight 11 had been hijacked as early as 8:13 a.m. that morning, and that 2 flight attendants telephoned American Airlines personnel with confirmation that a hijacking occurred at 8:21. Yet, according to the FAA official timeline, NORAD was not notified until 8:40, about what, 20 some odd minutes later. Is that basically accurate? Basically your understanding?
Commissioner, I did see the notice of the flight attendants. I'm not aware of that, and I will give you the synopsis or the chronology as I understand it. But again, I think it's I'd want to get the real precise numbers from the air traffic control people. But as I recall it, and from my own notes of looking back and jotting some things down, 8:20, about 8:20 was the first indication for Boston that there was a problem. Now, there was no, there is a special signal that a pilot can give, as I know you know, Senator, if it's a hijacking or there is an emergency. There was nothing like that, but the transponder or the signal was lost. And so the procedure is to begin to contact the aircraft. And I believe, and again, we'd want to double check this, but I believe that there was an attempt to raise the aircraft about 3 or 4 times, and they were unsuccessful. And so at about 8:34, based on the good initiative of the controller and his supervisor, the NORAD was actually, that was the first notification from the controller and the supervisor to Otis. It was the official one is 8:40, as you've suggested. After they did that, they then called up to headquarters, and then the official notification. What that said to us, and when we think about what protocols did we need to re-examine, that was one. We applaud the controller, applaud the supervisor for taking individual initiative on taking that action, but we recognize that we needed to make that communication much clearer. We needed to change the protocol, and there are some changes. Some are classified, but certainly could be provided to this committee. But there were changes that were made that made it very clear, or made it much clearer. But I do want to commend the controller and the supervisor who at 8:34 called Otis.
The reason I asked that question was that the commission has been made aware of a communication that alleges that there was some kind of planned test attack or drill attack on the United States on that day, scheduled for that day, and that maybe some of the slippage in time, either by the FAA or NORAD, might have been due to the fact that there was somehow an awareness that whatever problem was going on in the air was a drill. Are you aware of any planned drill mock attack on the United States that might have just been misinterpreted by either people in the FAA or NORAD as just a drill, and then found out that something really was going on?
No, I am not, Commissioner.
Mr. Mead, are you aware of any drill that was going on that day, some mock attack on the country that we should have, that people might have slowed down their reaction, say, oh, well, this is just a drill, and it's not really real, that might have slowed down any reaction by FAA or NORAD?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some questions that we'd like for you to submit for the record. May I just say, what's one of the things that you carry away from this experience, Ms. Garvey, having, in effect, as head of the FAA, and dealing with the responsibility for safety and promotion of the airline industry? Looking at it all, you've had a time to reflect. What's one or two things that you really carry away from this experience? You mentioned your understanding that we are in a special world now, special operations against a public transportation system. Do you have some other thoughts about what that day meant to us and what future FAA directors or this commission should look at in terms of recommending to the United States government?
Well, some thoughts I will tell you are very personal, but I think certainly, and those are thoughts of anguish. As I think, as Mr. Mead said, I don't think any of us will ever forget the pain and the anguish of the people in New York felt, and the families, the individual families felt. I think certainly one thought was the remarkable work, and I appreciate the chairman mentioning this. I think the remarkable work that the air traffic controllers, that the managers, that the pilots and flight attendants on the other aircraft, many of whom knew what had happened in the system. And I think the magnificence of the professional work done by those men and women is something that I will certainly always remember. They were remarkable and individual acts of courage. The Inspector General and I were speaking the other day about the need keep focused even as we move forward, and he mentioned that in his comments. I think there are many incidences, and we are probably all guilty of it, where we are captured by something, we know its importance, but we are diverted to other things. And so how the challenge of keeping the focus and keeping the attention on security. But at the same time, the tremendous challenge that both the executive branch, that Congress has, and many in the private sector have as well. How do you find the right balance? How do you find the balance between making sure we are as secure as we possibly can be, but also recognizing we are an open and free society?
And therein lies a great challenge for all of us. Mr. Mead, what do you think that you have learned in understanding not only the weaknesses, and you've articulated them very well, before 9/11, but what have you learned that maybe we should still be doing, or this commission should recommend to the Congress or to the government to do in terms of aviation safety? Because you know that the airlines are in deep trouble now, that many people are afraid to fly for many reasons. And as the coding system goes up, the anxiety of the country goes up, people are scared. How can we go about our business in this country and not just live constantly in fear, particularly as we fly? What are some of the things we ought to be thinking about, this commission ought to be recommending?
Well, it's hard to put into a law, I think, but one characteristic of the security program you're reviewing has been in the past that it tends to respond to empirical evidence of tragedy or an incident.
Closing the barn door after the horse is off.
Yes, and it's all meant in good faith, and it's a sensible thing to do, but I think we have to broaden our thinking to think of the different scenarios that can play out and give the regulators the charge to do that, and then to the authority to do something about it. I think when you look back over the experience with the system that we had in place before 9/11, that admittedly wasn't designed to catch box cutters, wasn't designed to catch people that were willing to kill themselves, but it had a lot of weaknesses that a lot of people knew about for many years. And I think our tolerance level of that has to be very low. That's one of the lessons of 9/11. I mentioned in my testimony covert testing. What I mean by that is testing that's unannounced, that's rigorous, that would mock what the types of scenarios would be. Test the system, find the holes in it, and don't tolerate long delays in closing those holes.
Good guidance. And as one who was sitting on the Commerce Committee and was original co-sponsor, Senator Fritz Hollings and others, of the new Transportation Security Act, in terms of aviation security, hopefully we are doing a better job out there now. But I think we go back to the same point. If people are willing to die, it's hard to defend against. We just have to keep changing it, taking away some of the predictability. Because one of the things that I've learned about the Al-Qaeda and some of the terrorists that we face is that they practice long and hard based on predictability. And then they rehearse. Then they get the committed individuals. If we can keep them off balance, either be on the strategic offensive militarily, a strategic offensive in terms of preemptive intelligence, identifying the problem before it gets to us, those kind of things. We are in this war game here. And is that your understanding, Ms. Garvey?
Absolutely, and I think you make an excellent point. In addition, the layers of security, it's changing it, it's being somewhat unpredictable, and it's the layers of security. I think it is Brian Jenkins or someone I have read mentions keeping the veil of mystery between some of the layers, and I think that's an important notion and an important concept to keep in mind.
Mr. Mead?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think one of the interesting things about security now is it's almost as though we're trying to cover every exigency or every possible contingency with the screening. And one of the big issues I see for the Transportation Security Administration is making sure that they keep the heat on. And it's not going to be automatic that we're going to have a sense of vigilance. It's a matter that we're all going to have to work very hard at.